Museums and galleries have some similarities, but they definitely have some differences as well. Museums are larger, they display artwork. The artwork that you see in museums is not for sale. Um, Instead, the museum is used for different purposes. And the various types of museums, there can be big museums, it can be small museums. We have a museum here in Wilmington, Cameron Art Museum, over on Independence and 17th. It's a smaller museum. It has some really good shows though, and it has a really good park outside. The larger museums are in larger cities. And New York City, since basically the kind of turn of the century, mid 19th, 20th century rather, really became the mecca for artists and art galleries and museums and all that. This is a picture of the outside of the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's called the Met for short, and it houses one of the largest collections of art in the United States. This is a six-story building with many different wings. It takes up an entire block. At the top part of it's the upper west side, I'm sorry, upper east side of Central Park in a very kind of wealthy area. It could take you weeks to go through this whole thing. I have been here a few times. I like it a lot, and but I have not been to every room. I admit that I usually bypass some of the older work because it has stuff from prehistoric time period to modern. And so I usually bypass all the prehistoric to get to the fifth and sixth floor where it has the more contemporary work, the newer work. And then it has this wonderful balcony patio part that always has some really interesting sculpture. So the Met is our country's main huge museum. In France, they have the Louvre. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been in some movies, and certainly if you've read or watched The Da Vinci Code, you might be familiar with this. They added this pyramid, I think it was in the early 2000s or maybe late 90s, and it is very different. The architecture of it is very different than, this glossy metal and glass sculpture next to these, very historic French architecture of the past. Was an incredible juxtaposition, and people, it was seen as a travesty by a lot of people, but it's come to become the symbol that, dictates what the Louvre is. So the Louvre is to our Met, basically. This is a museum that houses everything from prehistoric work to modern in the Louvre. It's a beautiful museum. Again, it could take you forever to go and see everything. Usually when you go to a museum, you're going to see a specific show that they put on display that's been curated. It might be a what's called oh shoot, my brain is stopping right now. It could be, all works from one artist from when they were very young to, later more well-known work. A retrospective. I'm sorry, that's what it's called. A retrospective is showing the life's work of a certain artist. Or it could be, impressionists from, so it would be a bunch of different artists, but they all do impressionism. So that's usually what draws a crowd to the museums. Back in New York, this is the Solomon Guggenheim Museum, which is very close to the Metropolitan Museum. And so I usually hit both of them in the same day. And this Guggenheim only shows modern artwork. So it's not going to have any prehistoric. It's actually not going to show anything probably before 1870s, maybe 1860s. But it's going to go from 1860s to basically the 1960s. It'll show work within that time period, but from all over the world. You just have to be a modern artist. It's a very interesting building. The building is often considered as interesting as some of the art that goes in it, for sure. Also in the Upper East Side is the Whitney. Now this building, which, I always think of a Tetris block. I think because that's kind of my generation game. If you look at it, it doesn't have a lot of windows. It looks kind of depressing. It's a dark brown cement, lots of cement building. And this shows only American artists. So it doesn't matter what period they come from, but they have to be American. You have to be American to have your work seen in the Whitney. Okay, so this has been around. A lot of people have been on the board of directors of this. Jackie O was, and various other wealthy and famous people. The problem is American art, especially modern, like from the 1960s to now, American art tends to be very big. We like to do things big in America. And this museum was not quite big enough to house some of the really important pieces. They couldn't get it in the building. They didn't have galleries large enough to display the work right. So about it's got to be about 10 years now. They started raising money to build a new Whitney. Now they go cross town. They're going down by in the meatpacking district, which is catty corners, kind of down by the river, down by the Staten Island Ferry and all of that area. And this is the new Whitney. This is a photograph before it opened. You can see the ceilings aren't exactly finished here, but the shape is referencing the old building. But now it's got more light coming through. It's larger. The scale is huge. So you will not run out of space to show lots of large work. And this is on my bucket list. I have not been to New York probably in 10 years. And so I have not seen there. And this would be the place I would go, make sure I saw the building and experience the new Whitney. I've been to the old Whitney several times, but so again, it's open to the public. Museums usually charge a fee to get in, and it's just bringing all different kinds of people who enjoy art together to see various works. And I've got an interesting video that we'll watch of someone, kind of looking into them. This is the Met, inside the Met. I just want you to get a scale for some of the work. This from the Baroque period and even some of the Renaissance pieces, really, really massive scaled work. This is also the entrance to the Met. The circle or octagonal or whatever shape that is in the center, that's just the customer service welcome center. And then the ticket booths are off to the end. They're over here. And when I was going to the Met, now granted this was about 10 years ago, if you didn't know any better, you would just walk up and you say, how much is a ticket? And they would charge you $12. But in reality, if you knew that you could actually pay what you can afford. So students, art students, and people who would go there a lot, they would maybe slide across, like I'd give $5. I'd say, okay, here's my $5. May I have a ticket? And they would sell it to you for that. I had a student who went there recently who said that the ticket prices were up to $24. And I don't know if that secret, like if you just pass them a $5, if that works anymore. I'm not sure, but I would try it. Here is the video.
In the years since I was an intern here at the MFAH in 1975 and 1976, the museum world has changed tremendously. There's been a seismic shift in the way museums see themselves and the way they serve communities. When I was a young man, museums were places for specialists. They were run by specialists and they were conceived for specialists, kind of like a research library. That's what museums used to be. No longer. Now they're community centers. Now they attract, and rightly so, the most diverse audience that they can, and they see themselves as places of self-discovery where anyone can walk off the street without any previous knowledge or training, come in and see what other human beings before them have made, and learn from these objects, and as I like to think, discover themselves. I think of works of art as mirrors in which you look at this object and you see aspects of your own interests, personality, upbringing, culture, beliefs, values reflected back at you. Sometimes all these things are challenged by the object that's there in front of you. But I see that as a mirroring, imitative experience. Sometimes it's attraction, sometimes it's repulsion, but it's always, when it's working, an engagement between a viewer, a visitor, and a work of art, an installation, an environment. And when you multiply those works of art and those visitors, you get a community. And that's what museums have become, community centers, not for basketball or sports teams, but for intellectual growth, for spiritual sustainment, for a place to ponder the big existential philosophical questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Why are we here? This museum has all the ingredients for anyone to come in and discover themselves and to actually answer those questions.
And so, it is becoming more of a cultural experience. This is, and I'll tell you, if you're, I was kind of raised going to museums. My mother was very interested in art, and she dabbled a little bit in painting. And so she, in her efforts to expose us to that, my brother and I often visited galleries, and we went to go see shows and musicals and theater and all of that growing up. But there is something kind of awesome about walking. This is from the Tate Modern in London. I was fortunate enough to be in London during this particular show, and it was really strange because there's all these cubes. They were made out of, it was some kind of solid plastic, almost like plexiglass, but it, obviously frosted, but they didn't even seem that sturdy as plexiglass, but it was just really kind of unique. And they were arranged in a way that you could move them, right? There's no guards there telling you can't move things, and you could touch them and things like that. But it was a really unique experience because it's so odd. You're walking amongst these regular shaped white boxes into what? A new world, into a new space. And what's it all about? And there is something there. There is something that kind of triggers a new experience, and one that you can share with your peers in, I think, a very interesting manner. If you haven't been to museums, or you want to take your family or a date or something like that, go to the Cameron Art Museum, show your student ID, you get a discount. There's great art. They have a great sculpture garden you can walk around for free. If you do go in, there's a great little cafe. The food's really good. Some nights they have jazz, playing. It's a great kind of date night thing. And you have this experience with somebody, and you can talk about it. It's really quite fascinating. In museums also attract a lot of educational classes, even from elementary school all the way up to college. I'm sure you went to some. Here, when you look at the people, they look mostly college age to me. And in front of the painting, which is illuminated the brightest here, we have a sign language interpreter. And then we have the woman who is an art historian who knows specifically about this artist and this painting. So she will give a public talk. This might happen every night in different rooms by different art historians, or it may happen a couple times a week. It may be, I'm not exactly sure how frequent it is. And of course, students are encouraged to go, but also it's really open to anybody. And so you can learn specific things about an artist from someone who has studied the history, the life of specific artists. So it's really kind of, again, allows you, any of that education, any of that information just allows you to understand where they're coming from. And you just never know how that's going to inspire your life. right? So there is a big educational aspect of museums. Art students will often go to a museum to copy the art that's in there, to make sketches of them, to learn from how the masters did things. You know, the masters, Leonardo, Da Vinci, and Michelangelo, they had students, they had people that they taught. Well, of course, they're gone now, so we can't, learn from them, but we can learn from their work. And it's just another way to broaden your art history. I found this image. I just thought it was so cute. This little kid looks so, into it. I just love it. Other things that happen at museum is there's restoration, preservation, things like that. So this is behind the scenes at a museum. This would not be open to the public. This looks like people that are getting some texts ready to go on display. So they're protecting them and making them safe and making them archival. One of the things about our old paper documents, whether it's, a letter or newspaper, they can deteriorate with time. So the museums know how to preserve things very well. And then there's also restoration and cleaning that happens at museums. Let's just say you inherit a painting from, a grandparent or someone, and you discover that it's worth something, but it's been kept in an attic because nobody knew, right? You probably couldn't get it cleaned at Cameron Art Museum, but they could contact you with somebody in Raleigh or Charlotte, or even you may have to send it to New York, depending upon the severity of the damage. But you would get it repaired by professionals who know what they're doing. Here's an example of before on the left and after on the right of a clean painting. So most paintings are covered with a varnish, just like a wood surface would, and light and air and pollution and things like that are what make the work darker. So luckily, the varnish can be removed without actually touching the paint underneath. And so this person is removing the varnish. She might be even touching up some things. But then they remove the dirt and then they paint varnish on top of it to preserve it. And then in 100 years or when next time it needs to be cleaned, someone else will do the same thing. It's a very painstaking process. The other thing that happens with museums is they trade work. If they're going to put together a show, this is by Murillo, and if they're putting a show together for Murillo, they inspect the person. There's a person from the museum that's loaning it that watches the painting get packed. They fly with the painting and they watch it be unpacked. And they point out any blemishes or anything that's wrong with it or anything that's very delicate, whatever. Because as soon as they hand it over to the new museum is now responsible for the protection of that artwork. And art nowadays is so valuable. It's worth so much money. It's almost bonkers. But so there has to be that kind of pointing things out, making sure everyone knows what's what. And so that's kind of what's happening here. Now, a lot of museums were started by very wealthy collectors of art, and it's still happening now. A lot of contemporary artists working today have clients who buy their work, and that's what helps them pay the bills, right? So one of the biggest collectors was J.P. Morgan, and he started, he was a financial person of the 19th and 20th century. He amassed one of the largest collections, not just of art, but also of books. And then David Rockefeller took over the J.P. Morgan business. I don't know if it was Chase then. I don't know all the history of the company, but he started investing and purchasing some artwork. Here's the one thing, and I'm no business person, but art does not depreciate. It always is going to be worth more than what you paid for it. Now, again, the art is always going to be more valuable than what you paid for it. The asterisk to that is, if you only buy something for $20, very rarely are you going to make, 2 million off of it. But if you put, a couple hundred into something, then over some years you might be able to triple, or sell it for a couple thousand, and can go on from there. Um, yeah, so David Rockefeller really was also, see, and I need to tell you that what I meant to mention rather is that both JP Morgan and David Rockefeller loved art. They found value in it. So purchasing it, collecting it, putting, financial backing into it pleased them. And here's a video. This is the curator who works at JP Morgan. She has a really cool job.
This is a painting by Sam Francis, who was an emerging artist. David Rockefeller visited him in his studio in 1959, so it's a really fabulous work and a foundational artwork in the collection. It was acquired in 1961 for a flagship Chase branch. The art collection was founded by David Rockefeller. He had a vision that art at work, which is what he called the art collection and program, would elevate the experience of people that work at the bank and also those who come and do business with us. David Rockefeller believed that art would inspire people to think in a more creative way, to approach their work, kind of energized by the vision of other people. And artists have a way of opening our eyes and helping us see the world through a different lens. There are lots of examples in the early 1960s of David Rockefeller and the art committee that he worked with identifying artists who were not known, and they were African American artists, they were women artists, all different backgrounds and cultures, working in a variety of media. The art collection is a catalyst for connection. It connects our clients, our colleagues, and our communities. So for 6 decades, this collection has been a point of contact and a real culture carrier in our company because it's always focused on emerging artists. The idea that artists are at the pulse of what's happening in our culture, in our country, and all over the world, it reflects the global vision of our company and recognizes that artists are an important part of the creative economy. Our company is very committed to diversity of all kinds to this day, and it's a big commitment that we have. We walk the walk and we talk the talk. This is an artist, Neil Goldberg, who lives and works in New York, whose practice is really quite diverse. This is a recent acquisition. It's called Other People's Prescriptions, and it's a way of kind of metaphorically and literally inviting you to see the world through someone else's eyes. So the collection really has kind of every example of painting, sculpture, photography, increasingly digital and video art. So it's a very multi-dimensional collection, and it also reflects our focuses on modern and contemporary art. This is a painting by Joan Mitchell, a woman artist, made in 1959, acquired for the collection in 1960. She's an artist who, in recent decades, has, after her death, gained a tremendous amount of notoriety and reputation. It's a very different time now than it was in 1959 when David Rockefeller established the art collection. And my team and our predecessors have always held up that legacy. It truly inspires us every day.
Another art collector and niece of Solomon Guggenheim, who opened that modern art gallery in New York City, Peggy Guggenheim, was an avid collector. And she amassed an amazing collection of art. She sponsored a lot of artists, gave them money to survive, to make their work, and therefore she got first kind of dibs on a lot of their artwork as well. She's an amazing character, and at the end, I'm going to show you, well, I'll show you. This is her house in Venice that she moved to, I think, at some point in her life. She had houses everywhere. Very wealthy family. I have fortunately been to Venice and been to this museum. It's amazing. So she literally lived with the work. This is an entrance to her house. This is, a foyer, if you will. And there's Picasso's, there's art, there's a Calder mobile hanging down. I mean, each one of these pieces individually, it could be worth millions. And, she just lived with it every day, every day. Here she is standing next to Pollock. She does have several Pollock paintings. This video I'm going to show you is a documentary about her. And I want to tell you guys, you can watch any documentary on any visual artist. If you find this one, I haven't looked for, so I'm not sure how hard it is to get. But any movie that's about an artist or a documentary on an artist and write a review, I will give you extra credit points. You can just email those to me. I don't know if I have an extra credit. No, there might be an extra credit hookup in discussion board. If you don't see one, just email it to me and I'll add some points.
It seems to me that you have an intuition for talent even before it's realized.
Yes, maybe.
What do these pictures mean to you yourself?
Oh, they've become more or less the most important part of my life. I can't imagine now living without them.
She'd carved out a niche for herself, and she filled it. She made it as a collector, and as a kind of collector that never quite existed before.
She wanted this art as a mirror for her own strangeness.
I think sex and art went absolutely hand in hand in her brain.
She was talked about as such a slut for doing the same thing that all the men around her were doing.
Peggy is a sort of model for the liberated woman.
Peggy appealed to me because of her eccentricities. Just a wonderfully colorful family.
The Guggenheims progressed from selling door to door to having these enormous fortunes.
You must have been extremely shocked when your father died on the Titanic.
Yes.
She actually helped artists to leave Europe to the United States, so she very much saved artists.
You could have wound up in a concentration camp.
Yes, I know that.
She managed to put together one of the great collections of modern art for the almost laughable sum of $40,000.
Some of these prices are subjective because they're so rare. You're talking billions of dollars.
My father showed with her, my mother showed with her. She was a big part of their lives in 1946, when I was 3.
I first met Jackson Pollock when he was working as a carpenter in my uncle's museum, so I rescued him from that.
And how do you feel about walking down the ramp at the Guggenheim Museum and seeing your paintings in a completely different environment?
Oh, my uncle's garage, yes. Well, it looks like a garage, doesn't it? I think if he saw this now, he'd turn in his grave. I came to Venice, which I'd always adored, which had been my dream city.
Did you feel it was a crazy life?
Definitely, yes. It was all about art and love.
So again, if you can find this video and watch it, and any other one, please feel free to do so. So this is the inside of the Venice home/museum, and most of her personal stuff has been removed, but they leave some furniture so you can get an idea of what the room was used for. So again, her dining room, right? Just amazing. Now the Vogels are a totally different kind of collectors. They do not come from money.
He is a retired postal worker. She is a retired librarian. They are Herb and Dorothy Vogel, and on their meager salaries, they've pulled off a miracle. The Vogels have amassed one of the most important collections of modern art in America, a collection conservatively estimated to be worth millions. But Herb and Dorothy Vogel don't care one whit about the money. They have never sold a single piece, never made a dime from their collection. The Vogels did what they did for the love of it, the adventure of it, on their unlikely voyage of discovery. These 3 paintings by Robert Mangold, for instance, would probably sell for a couple of $100,000. Sculptures like this one by Saul Lewitt have brought as much as $75,000. Herb and Dorothy Vogel own more than 2,000 paintings, sculptures, photographs, and drawings like these, works that sold for next to nothing when the Vogels began collecting unknown artists 30 years ago, works which today are considered masterpieces of avant-garde art.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here.
Whether or not their taste is your taste, there is no denying the Vogels have hit the jackpot, and so now they live the high life in the social swirl of the New York art scene, right? Wrong. They live in the same 2-room Manhattan apartment they've rented for 30 years.
People are always hitting their head against it, so you sort of have to be aware of it all the time when you're walking.
I was born.
Yeah.
The Vogels, you see, have never made a dime from the art they've owned. They have never sold any, no matter how valuable a work has become. For them, art is not an investment. It is the passion of their lives. Do you remember how much you paid for that?
We never reveal prices, Mike. We don't like to do that.
Okay.
I don't think that it's appropriate for us.
Understood.
Okay.
Understood. But I take it that you then become friends of a lot of the people whose pieces you collect.
Many. Here's Christo. We're very friendly with Christo.
Christo is the artist famed for using the whole world as his canvas. He's wrapped the islands in Miami's Biscayne Bay, and he's dotted the California countryside with umbrellas. Today, Christo's collages sell for up to 6 figures. But 20 years ago, Christo and his wife Jean-Claude could barely afford a roof over their heads, and that is when they were discovered by the Vogels.
It's very funny because they was very known already in the late 60s. The name Vogel is known in the art world.
In the late 60s?
Yes.
Already?
It's because at important exhibition, group exhibition, you often would read the caption, Collection Herbert and Dorothy Vogel. Or in the catalogs, publication, Collection Herbert and Dorothy Vogel. So one day they phoned and he says, I'm Herbie Vogel, could I come and see you? And I put my hand on the receiver and I say, Christo, we're going to pay the rent. The rich collectors are coming.
And in walk.
And they walk, and of course we understand right away that
Forget the rent.
Forget the rent. That was not.
We became friends, and that summer they were doing the Valley Curtain. We took care of their cat, Gladys, for them, and in return they gave us a work of art. That's how we got our Valley Curtain collage.
Herbie was clerk in the post.
Clerk in the post?
Yes. We never know what post office. I try to find it to go to buy stamps.
Very often, if he still wanted to buy something and didn't have the money, he would borrow on his life insurance.
Or pension.
Or pension.
From the pension.
It was amazing because he and Dorothy have the same sickness, the same disease as the artist. And they have the virus.
Herb and Dorothy can get an art fix anywhere they happen to be in their apartment, and sometimes their masterpieces turn up in the most unexpected places.
That was by Richard Tuttle. You see?
Now.
No, right here.
Yes, I see it.
That was first shown at his exhibition at the Whitney, I think in 1975. And then we had it in another place in our apartment.
Dorothy,
Yeah.
wait a minute, please.
That's a fact. That is not a made-up thing.
No, I know, but that's a work of art.
That definitely is a book of art by Richard
And you know
Powell.
something?
Yes.
I understand Morley Safer better now.
Oh.
My colleague Morley Safer inflamed the art world last year with his 60 Minutes report suggesting that art like this is a fraud. But Herb and Dorothy couldn't care less. They like it, and that is all that matters to them.
And you know, Mike, this is one of our most famous pieces.
We've loaned it since then.
I don't know why, but it is.
It's been on loan to another show at the Whitney. It's been in California in another exhibition.
It's a piece of rope. Is
That's
that a tack through it?
Yeah, it's a little nail.
Yes, it is.
A little nail.
Yeah,
And it's a little shredded on either end.
Right.
that's right.
Signifying what, if I may?
It doesn't have to signify anything.
No.
It's just it's a visual thing.
That piece of rope is worth only a few $1,000s. But its real value to the Vogels is that the artist, their friend Richard Tuttle, came to their apartment and put it on the wall himself. The Vogels bought all these artworks with Herb's salary, and they covered their living expenses with Dorothy's. And when they decided it was finally time to find a permanent home for their works, the Vogels passed up lucrative offers from many museums. Instead, they chose to give the collection away.
So they'll be in Washington tonight?
For the past 2 years, it's been moving to the National Gallery of Art in Washington in exchange for a small yearly stipend to the Vogels that's nowhere near what the collection's worth.
We like the idea of giving it to the nation, that we have both worked for the government. I worked for the city, Herbie worked for the government. And we like the idea that the gallery was free. It didn't charge admission. Also, they don't deaccession. Once you give something to them, they will not sell it. And it was really one of the finest institutions in the world. And it was perfect for us. Oh my God.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh my God.
Herb and Dorothy owned the blueprint for this wall drawing by the artist Saul Lewitt, but there had been no room in their apartment to have it painted. At home, they'd had to lock this sculpture by Richard Tuttle in the bedroom to keep it away from their cats.
I remember one time a bug came on that one and I tried to get it off.
Now, when Herb and Dorothy stroll around the National Gallery, they are accompanied by a curator or two. A far cry from the time 32 years ago when this son of a sweatshop worker and his blushing bride honeymooned at the National Gallery. Herb gave Dorothy her first art history lesson there, and for years before that, he had arranged his own life so that he could take art courses and hang around painters as much as possible.
I used to work in the post office on a night shift and get 2 hours sleep. And I'd go to a lot of important lectures. I did it all by myself. Nobody told me to do so. And then I stayed with the artists, learned what they told me. And it's through these people.
They became your buddies?
Yes. And it's through them that I've learned. I knew nothing. And I still remember their generosity. They could have just said, who's this guy?
One of the close friends the Vogels made in the early days was a struggling artist named Robert Mangold. Today, he's at the top of his profession. His work on display at top-ranked galleries around the world, including this one in New York's Soho Art District.
This is minimal art. You see, it's minimal colors, minimal shape, minimal configuration, so that you may have to focus in on what is there. You have to look at the colors. You have to look at the shapes.
The director of the Pace Gallery will be happy to sell you a Mangold, but be warned, he's no longer the bargain he was when Herb and Dorothy discovered him 30 years ago. $130,000. You serious?
Yes, we're serious.
One's reserved, $200,000. The Vogels own more than 70 works by Robert Mangold alone, but they prefer to remain blissfully ignorant of their market value. They would not even look at the Pace Gallery's price list.
But it's perfectly apparent that you could have made, who knows, a small fortune just with your Mangolds and said, we're not going to do that.
We didn't do it to make money. Obviously, we didn't.
It's quite apparent.
I didn't make a $20 bill on any work of art.
Outright.
I didn't even make a $20 bill outright on any artist. Outright, I never sold their works.
In 30 years?
30 years. We never put anything on the market.
Herb is 72 years old now. Dorothy is 59. They have no children, no distractions, as they search for the next unknown artist to catch their eye, decades ahead of the pack. Everything the Vogels buy will one day wind up in the National Gallery, which means that Herb and Dorothy are out browsing on behalf of you and me. The National Gallery put part of the Vogel collection on display last summer and fall. An exhibition like this one would be a crowning achievement for any collector, but for this postal clerk and this librarian, opening night was the giddy culmination of a life in love with art and with each other.
What would have happened to Dorothy had she not met you?
That I can't.
What would happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be a housewife up in Scarsdale probably with grandchildren.
What do you find so funny?
I guess I'm
What would
unconventional.
you be like without me?
I'd be nothing. I really mean that, because I think, Dorothy, you can't do it alone. I don't think, I don't want to be macho. I mean, I couldn't have done it without Dorothy.
When you came here on your honeymoon, here, not to this building because it wasn't built, but the one across the way,
Building.
30 years ago.
32?
32. Did it ever occur to you
Never.
that you would be sitting here?
It never would have occurred that we even have an art collection.
It's true. You never know what you can do, Mike, if you try it.
Can you imagine the millionaires, the billionaires who would like to be sitting there at this moment? I mean,
Yes, it's something money can't buy. Money can't buy love, and it can't buy whatever we have, whatever it is.
And money can't buy friends, like their artists.
Crystal!
Come on, John Claude. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Okay, so what I really like about the artists or the people, these collectors that I've shown you, have chosen to invest their money, no matter how much or how little they have in art because they love it. Now, what I said earlier about art does not appreciate still stands. So what's happening now, lately, is that people, wealthy people, are investing in art, maybe because they love it, but also because they know that it's just going to grow in value. So, it's kind of I'm jealous, and, it's also raising the prices of art to the point where even a fairly well-off person really can't afford to purchase any of the art on their own. It's just out of their league. Herb, unfortunately, has passed away. He was ill for quite a time, but Dorothy is still going on. I suppose that she is still collecting art. And this is some more pictures of inside their apartment, just everywhere. Enrique Serrato has amassed the largest collection of Chicano art, which is basically kind of Mexican-American art. This is his living room. This is his kitchen. The last I heard, he was looking for a place that he could rent or someone could help him start a museum. I haven't looked to see what else. So, again, with the passion, it's just so lovely of a story that I really enjoy it. Okay, so let's look at galleries. Now, galleries differ because you don't have to pay to get into a gallery. It's open to the public. And the other thing is that they do sell all the work you see in a gallery is for sale. Okay, so it's a business. This is how, when you're starting out in the art world, you start out by showing in galleries. Well, really, I should take a step back from that, because actually you start from having shows and getting into shows and putting your work up in coffee houses and restaurants and various kind of places. And then you get into galleries and you try to sell it. And then as you get more and more famous, then maybe the museums might call, but it doesn't always happen so fast, and it doesn't always happen, period. So here you can see looks like more of a community gallery. The way the art is hung is different than in a museum. You know, they're stacking a couple on top. Sometimes the subject matter matches, sometimes it doesn't. That's not really their concern. They're trying to show and sell as much art as they can. And the commission for galleries is often a 60-40 split. So the artist will get 60% and the gallery will get 40%. And that's a lot. That's a lot of money. And so work has to be priced to think that, right? Pricing art is a whole nother thing that gets debated all the time. But the gallery has to pay for people to keep the doors open. They have to pay the electric bill, the water bill, right? So they get that. They earn money when they sell art. So there are some galleries that will not represent certain artists because it just doesn't match their clients, and there's others that do. Now there is a range of galleries. What I've shown you here are kind of more on the local level. And I will tell you one thing, we have a lot of galleries in town, and most cities have one night a month where the galleries are open late. And in Wilmington, ours is the fourth Friday of every month. Well, this is before the COVID. I'm not sure when that's going to change or reopen, but the fourth Friday of every month, all the museums and galleries will be open late, and they have hors d'oeuvres and they have wine and various things, and people pop from one gallery to another. And it's a really kind of cool experience because you get to meet people, you get to meet the artist, you can ask the artist questions, and it's really kind of a fun thing. Also, another thing to do on a night, just something to do. So those were kind of more community galleries. And in the Vogel movie, they were talking about a Soho gallery. This is kind of one of those things. There are so many galleries in New York. It's crazy. But they have everything from the community to very specific and very high-end galleries, where the community ones, you might get up to a few $100s, maybe even $1,000. But in some of these exclusive ones, you're over $100,000, right? So there's galleries in between. So, so here is a apartment building, but in the lower level, there is a gallery and other shops and stuff. Kind of fancy. There are also, with the downturn of the economy, where a lot of businesses have gone out of business, there will be pop-up galleries just to fill this space. And there's been a lot of galleries and artwork that's about and for veterans to deal with their PTSD. And so this is an example of one of those kind of instances. But here's another storefront where, just art on display. And there'll be like a sticker on the front window here saying if you are interested in buying any of these, how to get in touch with the artist. Okay, so the galleries, they sell stuff, right? Museums don't. They trade and all of that, but they don't sell it directly off the wall. Now, churches in the past, in our history, the church funded a lot of art, and it also displayed art, especially since the Middle Ages, where the Catholics really ruled so much. The stained glass. I mean, that's an artist who designs these and puts these together. They're just beautiful. They're just beautiful. And then there's some architectural elements that are also artistic, and especially the gargoyles. And of course, the Sistine Chapel, right? The frescoes and things like that. This is another, I think this is in Italy, this cathedral. I'm a lax Episcopalian myself, but, this is a beautiful building. Who wouldn't want to sit here and think and listen to people sing and all of that? I mean, it just makes the experience that much better. I'm not knocking the fact that they have churches kind of everywhere, but this is certainly, a unique building and decorated really well. And that's in a lot of churches, a lot of traditional churches. So whereas the art is in the church quite often, this artist took the Washington Cathedral, projected images on it, so the church became the canvas. It became the substrate for these projected images. And so people who, anyone could experience this just driving by or walking around. And I'm not sure how long each projection was up, but I think, maybe a few nights, and then a new projection would come on. So it really became this community thing. Did you see the church tonight? What did it look like? Did you go by it? Where did you see it? It's kind of a cool thing. This is Rothko's Chapel. It's not really a church. It's more of a Zen kind of place, but some collectors in Houston, Texas built and designed this chapel specifically to show some of Rothko's paintings. Rothko is one of my favorites. I think I've mentioned that a time or three. Other places that are turning into museums or galleries and things like that are abandoned subway stations, all kinds of different things. Now, subways have always been a place for street artists, but now also you can go and see some really exceptional pieces too. In Bosnia, they turned a nuclear bunker into gallery space and artist space. A pop-up show happened at the bathroom at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Look at all those people in the bathroom. Now, earlier you may have heard the word curators. A curator is a person who puts together, conceives an idea of what would be an interesting show, puts together the artists that are going to be in that show and picks the artwork and all of that. And if they're successful, the show will generate a lot of buzz, which will draw people from the city, from the state, from the region, maybe even across America, just to go see this. And Thelma Golden put together a show, I think, that was very well, and I think everyone agreed was a really remarkable show. And it was called The Black Male. And these are just a few photos of the pieces that were there. And I'm not a black man, I'm a white woman, and so I can't necessarily identify with each of these, but I can appreciate them. The bottom left, which is called Lineup by Gary Simmons. I do remember growing up that kids were being killed by other kids for their shoes. It was the Nikes, the latest sports shoe, right? They were rare, they were coveted, and children were killing other children just for the shoes. And I think that this piece is very interesting because in the lineup, the individual is not important. It's the shoe. It's that identifying thing. Very, just something that was a reality for my generation. It was horrible. The other one is Fred Wilson's Guarded View, black skin-toned mannequins wearing museum guard wear. And you don't typically see mannequins in a dark skin, right? And other kinds of sports and representations of life, masculinity, freedom, those kind of things. So Thelma Golden became very respected after this show. So then you would try to hire her to do something else. So there's so many different specialties within the art world. And if you study art history, there's so many different ways that you can go involved in businesses and museums and galleries and all kinds of ways. I'm just going to call him Hans Ulbricht. Was drinking one night with some of his friends, and they were talking about creating a curated show that would never end. And over the course of the evening, they were laughing and joking and talking, and they actually came up with something, and it was called Do It. And what they did was they got instructions from, I don't know, maybe it was like 20 artists or so, something like that. And they asked each artist to give instructions on how to complete an art piece. And they got work from artists, painters, sculptors, dancers, all kinds of things. These books were reproduced in all different languages, and you or your group could pick one up and then do one of the pieces. And as long as the book was in publication, it never ends. And so what I'm showing you here are the various books. And then this is a dance routine. And it was put together by this dance company and, titled Do It. And it's really their interpretation. Because even though if you follow directions, you're going to put your own style into it, right? So they're not all going to be the same, and they will all change. So they were able to do it. Okay, so I want to end on a lighter note with this fabulous story out of Spain.
It's hard to know whether to despair or to laugh and laugh at what's happened inside this ancient Spanish church. For over a century, this fresco of Jesus has graced the wall just to the right of the altar. Naturally, over the years, its surface has deteriorated. It looked like this a few weeks ago. The damage was a real worry for one elderly worshipper. It prompted her to do a little restoration of her own, with results which were quite disastrous. This really is the same painting, comprehensively ruined. Poor old Cecilia Jimenez, in her 80s, is now having to defend herself and her skills. Her excuse seems to be that she hadn't quite finished.
I started fixing it, but then I had a last-minute trip with my son, and I thought, I'll finish it when I get back. And when I got back, the whole village was there, and I couldn't defend myself. I said, let me finish it, and they said, don't touch it. A restorer will come and will fix it. Don't touch it.
Even she's not sure whether to laugh or to cry.
Since I was 5 years old, I've had many exhibitions and sold so many paintings. Nothing like this has ever happened.
Joking aside, it is now a pretty big problem for the real restorers. The fresco wasn't priceless, but it is valuable and it needs fixing. Experts are not too hopeful.
This week we will know if we can restore it. We've organised a team to visit. They will have to work with the lady so she can tell them what materials she's used and exactly what she did. Then we will know if we can restore the painting or not and how much it will cost.
Locals outside the church are bemused, but amused as well.
A woman who had no knowledge and did not really understand the meaning of restoration. She does now.
I remember it before. There was a crown with thorns, and now it looks completely different. Very strange.
The attempt to put all this right again will begin very soon, with Cecilia presumably at arm's length. Mark Stone, Sky News.
I laugh at this story every time I hear it. This was a really popular story that went all across the internet for a long time. Just look at that. T-shirts are sold, mugs were sold, and then here's a Conan O'Brien episode I just thought was great.
This is a story that's been getting a lot of attention in the last couple of days, and you may not have heard of it, but it's pretty amazing. It comes out of Spain, this story. Apparently, a 19th century painting of Jesus that was hanging in a church got what's being called the worst restoration job ever. Yeah, everyone's talking about it. It's been online a lot. Here's how the painting used to look. Beautiful old 19th century painting, and it had some wear and tear. And then one of the churchgoers, a woman named Cecilia Jimenez, who is in her 80s and is not a painter, took it upon herself to restore the painting without asking anybody. And here is what she did to this rare and valuable painting. Yes, your reaction says it all, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the restoration job has become a worldwide joke, but one person wanted to come on the show and defend the restoration. Please welcome, this is unbelievable, the real Jesus. Here he is. Let's talk to him.
just want to say, I'm very happy someone finally got it right.
I had no idea. None of us had any idea this is what you really look like.
Oh, yeah. That old lady, that Spanish lady, kicks some ass, man. She got my lips right, and I love the way she captured my beard fro combo.
Yeah, amazing. Jesus, everybody. There he is.
So, so there's been all kinds of jokes for a long time after this happened. So let me tell you about this new development. As soon as it kind of got out there that this Celia, whatever her name is, had done this, people started traveling to this small village in Spain to have their picture taken or to go see it for themselves. So those people started eating lunch in this town. The church started getting more offerings from people. The hotels started to get more business. It actually generated a whole different kind of income for this town. And so they put off the restoration. And then earlier, I can't remember if it was late last year or early this year, the Celia Jimenez, whatever her name is trying to sue the church because they raised, a few $1,000s, and now she's trying to say that money should be hers. And it's just so I don't think it has been repaired yet. It's just kind of crazy. And there's another great Saturday Night Live where Kate McKinnon is playing the artist. Oh, it's funny. She's like, I want my money. It's just really, really great. So you never know. You never know. But really, I mean, it can't stay like that forever, can it? Oh, I just don't know. Okay, so your homework is for you to do some research on a museum. There's an attachment there for you. And it's you can find the information on any gallery or museum. They should have it in their info page, basically. And just answer the questions as best you can. All right, great. Thanks, guys.